Chapter 33. The Soufflé That Saved a Marriage. Success brought its own pressures. Between the restaurant and the shop, Jack and Janet barely saw each other. The morning kisses became distracted pecks, and the late-night ledgers replaced the late-night talks. The breaking point came when Jack missed their second anniversary dinner because of a kitchen emergency. He arrived home at midnight to find Janet sitting in the dark, the wildflowers he had sent her wilting on the table. "I'm sorry," Jack whispered, the words feeling empty. "I don't want an apology, Jack," Janet said, her voice quiet. "I want my husband back." Jack went into the kitchen. He didn't turn on the lights. He just started moving, measuring, whisking, folding. He didn't use a recipe. He used his heart. An hour later, he emerged with a chocolate soufflé. It wasn't perfect, it was slightly lopsided, and the top was a bit darker than it should have been. He set it down in front of her. "I didn't hide a ring in this one," he said. "I hid us." Janet took a bite. It was sweet, rich, and slightly bitter, just like the life they had built. She looked at him, and for the first time in months, she really saw him. "It's surpassed," she whispered. They spent the rest of the night talking not about leases or ledgers, but about the future. They decided to slow down, to hire managers, to take the weekends off, to remember that the three in their company was now the two of them and the life they were creating. Chapter 34. The Golden Horizon. The 80s continued to roll on, a decade of neon and change. Terry eventually found a job at a hospital in San Francisco and moved out, leaving Jack and Janet alone in apartment 201 for the first time in their lives. They eventually bought a small house in the hills, with a view of the sea and a kitchen large enough for a whole herd of cowboys. They had 2 children, a boy who loved football and a girl who had her mother's touch with flowers. Trippers became a legend, and Wood and Petals expanded into a boutique empire. But every Friday night, they would return to the Regal Beagle. They would sit at the same booth, order the same wine, and listen to Larry, who was now a happily married insurance salesman, tell stories that got more elaborate every year. And every now and then, on a fog-filled night, Jack would find that old Stetson hat. He'd put it on, look at Janet, and drawl, "Well, boy howdy, ma'am. You're still the prettiest thing in this here territory." Janet would laugh, the same clear, bright laugh that had first captured his heart in a crowded kitchen years ago. Because in the end, it wasn't the disguises or the deception that mattered. It was the courage to take a step that was new, to dance on a floor that was shared, and to realize that the best company wasn't 3. It was the person who stayed when the world finally, beautifully, became quiet. And as the golden sun of Santa Monica continues to rise and set over the Pacific, the story of the cook and the florist remains, a timeless reminder that love, much like a perfect soufflé, is worth every single tumble. Chapter 35. The Echoes of the 90s. As the 1990s dawned, the world began to feel faster, more digital, and less intimate. In the Tripper household, this change was most evident in their children. Jack Jr., whom everyone called JJ, was 18 and possessed his father's eyes, but none of his culinary patience. He was a drummer in a grunge band, wearing flannel shirts that made Jack wince and listening to music that sounded, to Jack's classically trained ears, like a garbage disposal in distress. "It's about the raw emotion." "Dad," JJ would argue, leaning against the kitchen island as Jack prepared a delicate beurre blanc. "I understand raw, JJ. I just prefer it on a sushi platter, not in my eardrums," Jack would retort, though a smile always tugged at the corner of his mouth. Lily, now 16, was the quiet observer. She inherited Janet's practicality and an uncanny ability to know exactly which flower would soothe a broken heart. She spent her afternoons at Wood and Petals, modernizing the shop's inventory on a clunky Mac computer that beeped incessantly. But the peace of their suburban life was interrupted by a phone call from Iowa. Janet's father, Roland, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The family traveled back to Des Moines for the funeral. Standing in the middle of a vast cornfield, under a sky that felt too big, Jack watched Janet. She looked small against the horizon, a successful city woman returning to the soil that made her. He never did like my seasonings, did he? Jack whispered as they stood by the grave after the service. Janet leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes red but steady. He loved you, Jack. He just didn't want to admit that a boy from California could make a better pot of coffee than he could. The trip to Iowa reminded them of where they came from. It reminded them that before the restaurants and the boutiques, they were just two kids in a crowded apartment trying to figure out how to be brave. Chapter 36. The Secret in the Shag. When they returned to Santa Monica, they found a letter waiting for them. The building that housed Apartment 201 was being designated as a historical landmark thanks to the petition Jack had led years ago. However, the designation required an official architectural survey. During the survey, the workers discovered something behind a loose panel in the hallway of their old apartment. Ralph Furley, now living in a retirement community but still possessing his keys, called them immediately. Jack, Janet, you won't believe it. We found a treasure. They met Ralph at the building. He was wearing a tracksuit that was surprisingly muted, a sign of the times, perhaps, but his excitement was as loud as ever. He handed Jack a weathered metal box. Inside wasn't gold or jewels. It was a collection of letters and a journal dating back to the late 1940s. It belonged to the original builder of the complex, a man who had returned from the war with a dream of creating a sanctuary for people who didn't quite fit in. One entry caught Janet's eye. Building the 3rd floor today. I want these rooms to be light. I want them to be places where people can start over, where a man can be a friend to a woman without the world pointing fingers. He built it for us, Janet whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Even before we were born, he knew we'd need a place like this. The discovery made headlines. The story of the Threes Company apartment became a symbol of a lost era of innocence and unconventional family. David Vance, now a disgraced former developer, tried to claim the journal for his memoirs, but Jack and Janet donated it to the Santa Monica Historical Society. Chapter 37. The Prodigal Cowboy Returns. Just as JJ was preparing to head off on a tour of Pacific Northwest dive bars, a familiar rumble echoed in the driveway. A dusty pickup truck with Texas plates pulled in. Out stepped Tex Tripper. He looked older, his face a map of sun and wind, but his Stetson was still perfectly creased. Heard the young'un was thinking about leaving the herd, Tex drawled, leaning against his truck. Tex stayed for a month. He didn't talk much about music, but he taught JJ how to fix the van's engine with nothing but a pair of pliers and a prayer. He took Lily out to the pier and showed her how to read the tides. One night, sitting on the porch with Jack, Tex handed him a small, carved wooden toad frog. Austin's retired, Tex said, a rare twinkle in his eye. But he wanted you to have this. For the times you had to be him, so you could finally be yourself. Jack looked at the little frog, remembering the mole, the eyeliner, and the way he had stumbled through his first howdy. I think I'm done with the disguises, Tex, Jack said, smiling. You were always a better cook than a cowboy, Jack, Tex chuckled, patting his cousin's back. But you had the heart of a wrangler. You held on to what mattered. Chapter 38. The Grand Reunion. To celebrate the building's landmark status and their 25th anniversary, Jack and Janet organized a party at the Regal Beagle. They rented out the entire place. Cindy flew in from New York, where she was now a high-powered executive assistant to a Broadway producer. Terry came down from San Francisco, bringing her husband and 2 young daughters. Larry was there, of course, looking distinguished, with a touch of gray at his temples, still trying to sell insurance to anyone who stood still for too long. The highlight of the evening was when Mr. Furley took the stage. He was 80 now, but when the music started, a remix of an old disco hit, he did a shimmy that brought the house down. To the Trippers! Larry shouted, raising a glass of the good wine. The best long con in history. It wasn't a con, Larry, Jack said, pulling Janet close. It was just a long way home. They danced on the same floor where they had once hidden from landlords and brothers. They laughed about the Spanish lessons and the chocolate soufflés. And for a moment, the 90s faded away, and it was 1979. Again, the air smelled of salt, the lights were neon, and they were young, clumsy, and entirely in love. Chapter 39. The Legacy of Apartment 201. As the party wound down, Jack and Janet walked back to the apartment building. It was quiet now. The new tenants, a group of young tech students, were out for the night. They stood in the hallway, looking at the door of 201. "Do you think they know?" Janet asked. "Know what? How much life happened behind that door? How many lies we told just so we could tell the truth?" Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He didn't use it. He just held it. "They'll have their own stories. January, their own Austins, and their own David Vances." They walked down the stairs, hand in hand. Outside, the Santa Monica fog was rolling in, thick and cool, just like it had been on the night they first realized that 3 was the most beautiful company in the world. And as the golden sun of a new decade prepared to rise over the Pacific, the cook and the florist drove home, leaving behind a legacy of laughter, a landmark of love, and the enduring spirit of a cowboy who never really existed, but who had changed everything. Chapter 40. The Digital Tide. The year 2005 arrived with the hum of the internet and the glow of early smartphones. Santa Monica was no longer the sleepy coastal town of the disco era. It was a tech hub, a playground for the young and the connected. For Jack Tripper, the change was most visible in his kitchen. Tripper's was still a landmark, but the customers were now more likely to be photographing their food than eating it. "They're calling it gastronomy, Janet," Jack grumbled one morning, scrolling through a review site on his computer. "They want foams and spherification. I just want to make a damn good roast chicken." Janet, who had successfully transitioned Wood and Petals into a high-end floral design firm with a thriving online presence, laughed. She was still elegant, her hair now a sophisticated silver that caught the light of their hilltop home. "Adapt or die, Jack. That's what you told me when I didn't want to buy that delivery van from Larry," she reminded him.